Imagine this. You're a federal employee, and suddenly, wham, you're injured on the job. Amidst the immediate pain and all the questions swirling around, one really fundamental right stands out. Who gets to choose your doctor? Is it your employer calling the shots, or is that decision actually yours? Today, we're diving deep into a critically important, but yeah, often misunderstood, area of federal workers' compensation. We're talking about your absolute right to select your treating physician under the Federal Employees Compensation Act, that's ESSA, and the specific OWCP regulations. Our mission here in this deep dive is pretty clear. We want to unpack the basic rules that protect your choice of doctor. Then, we'll look at how this right gets challenged in the real world. We've got some compelling case studies. We'll also discuss the certificate risks, and they can be surprising for both employers and medical providers who kind of disregard these rules. And finally, lay out some clear best practices, how to ensure compliance and protect this really vital part of an injured worker's recovery.
Yeah, and to guide us today, we've really pulled insights from, well, a pretty comprehensive set of sources. We've dug into the foundational legal regulations like 20 CFR 10.300, also authoritative Department of Labor guidance, think publication CA 810, various FECA transmittals, plus crucial national arbitration decisions, rulings from the Employees Compensation Appeals Board, ECB, you'll hear us say, and detailed reports from federal employee unions like the National Association of Letter Carriers, NALC. So a good mix.
Okay, great. So let's kick things off with the absolute core principle here. When a federal worker gets hurt, what's the very first thing they need to grasp about choosing their doctor?
Right. The most important point, I think, right off the bat, is that under FECA and the OWCP rules, an injured federal worker has the right to an initial free choice of treating physician. And that's not just, a suggestion or a courtesy. It's explicitly written into the regulations. It means you, the employee, you get to choose pretty much any duly licensed physician. Could be your private family doctor, could be a specialist, maybe someone at a federal place like a VA or military hospital. That's your attending physician. Now, there are a couple of limitations. The doctor has to meet FECA's definition of physician. So, for instance, chiropractors, their scope is limited under FECA, usually to spinal subluxation confirmed by X-ray. And the doctor can't be on the OWCP exclusion list. That's a list of providers OWCP has barred for, various reasons.
Wow, that's powerful. So the employee, not the agency, really gets to decide.
Exactly.
And what about emergencies? Does that hold up?
Oh, absolutely. In emergencies, any qualified physician can treat you without needing prior authorization first. The key is getting immediate care.
Think about the peace of mind that gives you. You're hurt, you're vulnerable, and you have the autonomy to pick the medical professional you already trust, or maybe someone you think is the best fit. Okay, that initial choice sounds absolutely crucial. How does it actually get, authorized? How does the agency approve it for payment and treatment?
Yeah, that typically happens through Form CA-16. The official name is Authorization for Examination and Booter Treatment. And the employing agency, they have a very specific duty here. They are required to issue the CA-16 within 4 hours of a reported traumatic injury. 4 hours.
4 hours, really?
Yeah. Now, if they give, say, verbal authorization first over the phone, they still have to follow up with the actual paper form within 48 hours. And something that's been a really significant clarification, this happened back in March 2023, the form now covers up to 60 days of treatment, starting from the date of injury.
Not from when the form was signed.
Exactly. That was a point of confusion before, could really cause problems for workers. So 60 days from the injury date. Big improvement.
That 60-day clarification, starting from the injury date, that sounds like a real game changer. It must cut down on a lot of ambiguity for injured workers.
Definitely.
And you mentioned traumatic injuries. What about occupational illness claims?
Yeah.
Like the ones filed on a CA2.
Right. Good point. For those occupational disease or illness claims, it's a bit different. Using a CA-16 for those generally requires getting OWCP's permission first. It's not automatic like with a traumatic injury.
Okay, so that form, the CA-16, it's basically your ticket to authorized care. You really need to know how it works, how long it lasts, and make sure it actually names the doctor you chose. It sounds fundamental.
Yeah.
So the employee has this right, check. There's a critical form to authorize it, check. Now, what about the employer? What are they absolutely forbidden from doing when it comes to, say, steering your medical care?
Well, this is really key. A core part of the OWCP regulation specifically, it's 20 CFR 10.300D, puts a clear duty on the employer. First, they must tell you about your route to choose your doctor. They have to inform you. And second, they have to respect that choice once you make it. But what's even more critical, and this is where things sometimes go wrong, agencies are prohibited from interfering with your selection. They can't direct it. The Department of Labor's own guidance, like in publication CA 810, it really hammers this home. It says agency personnel cannot interfere. They can't require you to go see an agency doctor or a contracted doctor before you go see the doctor you chose.
So wait, does that mean an agency can't even suggest their own clinic?
Well, they can offer an initial evaluation by an agency doctor, maybe someone at an on-site clinic, but, and this is the really important, but only if doing that doesn't delay or impede your visit to the doctor you picked.
Okay. So it can't block your choice.
Precisely. You, the employee, you keep the exclusive right to decide who provides your ongoing treatment.
That sounds like really important legal protection. It stops you from being kind of funneled into maybe a clinic that isn't your preference or, might not be the best fit for your specific injury. Every federal worker should know that. Okay, so you make that initial choice. You start getting care. Are you then locked in with that specific doctor forever? What if things change or you feel you need a different specialist?
Good question. No, you're not necessarily stuck forever, but changing your treating physician after that first free choice, well, that is regulated. OWCP rules, section 10.316, I believe, generally require you to ask OWCP for approval to change doctors.
Oh, okay, so you need permission.
Usually, yes. The main exception is if your original doctor refers you to a specialist. That kind of change is generally fine without needing separate OWCP approval beforehand. And look, OWCP usually approves changes if you have a valid reason.
Yeah.
But just switching on your own without getting that okay, that could jeopardize coverage for your medical bills.
Right, which really underlines why that initial choice, the one that's completely free, is so significant, isn't it?
Absolutely. It sets the foundation for your care under the claim.
And are there other sort of practical points or clarifications that people should know about?
Yeah, a few things come up. For instance, you might get care from nurse practitioners or physician assistants, maybe physical therapists. They can definitely provide services. But they don't replace the need for a physician's oversight and, importantly, their signature on the key medical reports OWCP needs. The primary medical direction still needs to come from a qualified physician.
That makes sense. What about travel, if your chosen doctor isn't right next door?
Right. OWCP looks at what's a reasonable distance for getting treatment. Generally, they consider a round trip of up to 100 miles as reasonable.
100 miles round trip, that's actually pretty generous.
It is. It accommodates employee choice, especially if you need specialized care that might be a bit further away.
So these details, they really help ensure your treatment stays consistent, your expenses get covered, even if, your care needs change or your preferred doctor is a town over. Okay, we've laid out the law, the regulations, the forms. Sounds straightforward on paper. But, as anyone who's dealt with bureaucracy knows, what's written down and what actually happens on the ground can sometimes be, different. So let's maybe pull back the curtain a bit. Let's talk about some real-world cases where this crucial right to choose was challenged. What happens when these rules aren't followed?
Oh, absolutely. We've seen plenty of instances where employer interference leads to disputes, problems with claims, even needing formal reversals. The Postal Service, for example, has, let's say a documented history of supervisors sometimes failing to tell employees about their right to choose. Instead, they might just send them directly to a Postal Service contract clinic. Sometimes there were even allegations of coercion.
Really? Coercion?
Yeah, in some cases reported by unions. There was a really notable national arbitration back in 1986 with arbitrator Mittenthal. It found USPS was violating the rules, and it made it crystal clear. Management can only require an immediate fitness for duty exam if and only if it doesn't interfere with or delay the employee getting to their chosen doctor. That arbitration flatly stated, the employee has the exclusive right to choose the physician who will provide treatment. Pretty unambiguous.
And those kinds of scenarios, they often led to grievances being filed and sustained, right? Costing the agency time, money.
Exactly. And sometimes resulting in payments for treatment that maybe wasn't even appropriate because it wasn't from the chosen physician. Here's another example, a VA hospital case. It's ECCAB docket number 12-0743. In that one, an employee alleged a supervisor actively discouraged him from even filing a workers' comp claim.
Discouraged him from filing.
Yeah, and discouraged him from seeing an outside doctor, insisting he should just get care like a regular VA patient through the hospital system. Now, in the end, the appeals board found there wasn't enough proof that he was actually prevented from seeing his chosen doctor. But the case itself really highlights how even the perception of employer meddling can become a major point of conflict, leading to formal appeals, dragging things out. It creates mistrust.
And it's not just about steering choices, is it? There's another issue that pops up, privacy.
That's a big one, yes. Agency overreach and potential Privacy Act breaches. We've seen situations where agencies, maybe a supervisor, tries to directly influence the medical evidence by contacting the employee's doctor directly without going through proper channels.
They just call the doctor.
Sometimes, yeah. There was a 2005 arbitration case, this was at a VA medical center, involving NAGE Local R5-136. The arbitrator found the agency had actually violated the Privacy Act by directly soliciting medical information from the providers, and it resulted in damages being awarded. So real consequences.
Wow. Okay, so if we connect all this to the bigger picture, these kinds of interferences, the steering, the delays, the privacy issues, how do they directly impact the OWCP claim itself?
Well, often they lead directly to OWCP claim denials. Think about it. If an employer delays getting you that CA-16 authorization or insists you go to their contracted clinic first, and maybe that clinic downplays the injury.
Right, you might not get a thorough initial exam.
Exactly. The initial medical report might be incomplete, or it might not strongly link the injury to your work duties. So OWCP gets this weak report, and they might deny the claim for lack of causal relationship or lack of medical rationale. Basically, the medical evidence isn't strong enough.
And the cause of that weak evidence might trace back to the employer's action.
Precisely. And when OWCP denies it, guess who might be on the hook for the costs? The agency itself. They might end up paying continuation of pay or other costs directly from their budget instead of OWCP picking up the tab. Yeah. The National Association of Letter Carriers, NALC, they've pointed this out repeatedly. They've noted how inadequate medical documentation, often from quick visits to contract clinics, frequently leads to these kinds of denials, forcing their members into long, frustrating appeal processes.
So these aren't just, theoretical legal points or precedents. They are real cautionary tales showing just how crucial protecting your right to choose your doctor is for the accuracy and, frankly, the success of your injury claim.
Okay.
Oh, knowing all this, understanding these real-world problems, let's talk about the stakes. What are the actual consequences, the tangible risks for both the federal employers and maybe even the medical providers if they just disregard these physician choice rules?
The risks are significant, definitely for both sides. For the employing agencies, ignoring 20 CFR 10.300 well, that's a direct violation of federal regulation. That can open the door to employee grievances, formal arbitration proceedings, and those proceedings can result in remedies like forcing policy changes, maybe even financial penalties. Plus, it attracts scrutiny from OWCP itself, or potentially even the Department of Justice, OIG, if it's part of a bigger pattern.
And beyond this sort of legal or procedural stuff.
Well, as we touched on, noncompliance can directly mess up claim outcomes. It increases the chance OWCP denies the claim for that lack of medical rationale. And like we said, that often shifts the financial burden back onto the agency. They end up paying when OWCP should have. That hits their resources.
And it's not just about the money, right? It must damage relationships.
Absolutely. It seriously erodes employee trust. It creates this feeling of bad faith. That can easily spiral into formal complaints of retaliation, maybe even OSHA whistleblower filings if the employee feels pressured about safety issues related to the injury. And, as we saw with that VA case, if they overstep boundaries in contacting doctors, that can lead straight to legal liability under the Privacy Act or even HIPAA regulations, potentially with damages awarded. It's a real minefield if they don't follow the rules.
Okay, so that's the agency side. What about the medical providers, the clinics, the doctors? What are the risks for them?
The stakes are pretty high for providers, too. If a clinic or a doctor relies too heavily, maybe exclusively, on employer referrals without really ensuring the patient's choice is respected, first off, they risk not getting paid if the treatment wasn't properly authorized through OWCP channels, like with a valid CA-16 naming the employee's choice.
So payment issues.
Big time. It can also lead to serious reputational damage, especially within the federal employee community. Word gets around, And in the most severe cases, they could face exclusion from OWCP. That means OWCP debars them, kicks them out of the program. They can no longer treat federal workers' comp patients or bill OWCP at all. That's huge.
Wow, exclusion. That's serious.
Very serious. Providers also risk non-payment if their documentation is sloppy or doesn't meet OWCP standards for rationalized medical opinion. And if that happens, the injured worker might end up blaming the provider for claim problems. Plus, think about perception. If a provider gets known as the agency's doctor, their medical opinions might actually carry less weight with OWCP, especially if it conflicts with the opinion of the physician the employee initially chose.
Interesting point.
Yeah, and there's one more subtle risk. inadvertently using an excluded provider themselves, maybe for a referral or consultation. If they refer a patient to someone on OWCP's exclusion list, those bills won't get paid, potentially leaving the injured worker responsible.
Okay, so this really isn't just about, ticking boxes on some compliance form. It's fundamental. It's about protecting legal standing, ensuring financial stability for everyone involved, and crucially, maintaining positive relationships both in the workplace and between patients and doctors. All right, given these very significant stakes, these real-world challenges we've discussed, how do we avoid these pitfalls? What are the practical best practices to help ensure everyone, agencies, supervisors, employees, providers, gets it right from the get-go? How do we safeguard this crucial right?
Right. It really comes down to proactive strategies for both the employers and the providers. For the agencies, step one, absolutely essential. They have to educate and train their supervisors on 20 CFR 10.300, period. This training needs to clearly emphasize that supervisors must inform the employee of their right to choose their doctor. Maybe they could use a standard handout or even a script based on the DL's CA 810 manual just to ensure consistency.
Absolutely. Consistent messaging is key. And then action. They need to issue that Form CA-16 promptly and properly. That means within the strict 4-hour window for traumatic injuries. And critically, making sure the form is filled in with the employee's chosen provider, not just a default clinic. And, as we discussed, avoid any delays or obstructions. Don't block the employee from getting to their chosen doctor. An agency doctor visit, if offered, must never impede or delay the employee seeing who they selected.
Exactly. And for better compliance, maybe even better documentation, it could be useful to have the employee sign a simple acknowledgement form. Just stating they were informed of their right to choose creates a clear record.
Good idea.
And when it comes to suggesting doctors, employers can provide guidance, maybe a list of local OWCP qualified physicians, but it has to be crystal clear that these are suggestions only. They need explicit communication saying the employee can choose any appropriate physician, whether on that list or not.
So guidance, not direction.
Precisely. And agency leadership can't just set these policies. They need to monitor and enforce supervisor compliance, maybe through audits of injury cases, soliciting employee feedback, and being ready to step in with retraining or even disciplinary action if supervisors aren't following the rules.
Okay, that covers the agency side. What about best practices for the medical providers themselves?
For providers, it's really crucial to build OWCP compliance into their practice operations. Never, ever present your clinic as the company doctor or the agency's preferred choice. Emphasize patient choice. Always ensure proper authorization, like that CA-16, is in place before providing extensive treatment. And focus on documentation. Produce high-quality, well-rationalized medical reports that clearly explain the diagnosis and, importantly, link the injury or condition directly to the patient's work duties. That's what OWCP needs.
And what about communication? That seemed to be a sticking point in some cases.
Yeah, both sides need to respect privacy and use the proper channels. Employers should generally rely on Form CA-17, the duty status report, for updates on work restrictions, and they should provide copies to the employee. Supervisors shouldn't be making direct calls to the doctor's office fishing for information.
Okay, here's the forms.
Right. And providers, on their end, should be trained to politely redirect any inappropriate requests for medical information that come outside those proper channels, protect patient privacy.
Makes sense. Anything else?
Just staying current. Everyone involved, agencies, providers, even employee representatives, needs to stay updated on OWCP policy changes. The Department of Labor website, FECA bulletins, those are the places to watch. Policies do evolve. But, if we step back and look at the big picture, ultimately the best practice is cultivating a genuine pro-employee safety culture. When employers truly prioritize their employees' well-being, respect their right to choose their own medical care, claims just tend to be managed more smoothly. It fosters trust, reduces conflict, and at the end of the day, improves outcomes for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. These best practices, they're not just about dodging legal trouble or saving money. They're really about creating a supportive environment, one that genuinely helps injured workers heal, get back on their feet, and return to work efficiently. And that strengthens the entire federal workforce, doesn't it? So to wrap things up today, we've really unpacked this crucial right that federal employees have the right to choose their own treating physician under OWCP. We explored some real-world examples where employer interference caused pretty significant problems. We definitely understood the tangible and sometimes surprising risks for both employers and providers when they fail to comply with these rules. And we laid out some concrete best practices to help ensure this vital right is protected and upheld. What really stands out to me from our conversation is how empowering the individual, giving them genuine autonomy over their own medical care. seems to impact the whole recovery process in these federal worker injury cases. Think about it. How do clear boundaries, explicit support for personal choice, how does that transform what could be a really stressful, confusing situation into maybe a smoother, more effective path back to health and work? And it makes you wonder, could this principle of explicitly protected individual choice benefit other areas within the federal system, or maybe even beyond? Something to mull over. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into physician choice and federal workers' compensation. We really hope this has given you a clearer picture of your rights and responsibilities and maybe armed you with some valuable insights, whether you're an employee, a supervisor, or a provider.